Charity White is the daughter of Jenny and Ronald White of Danville. She started Carlisle in fourth grade. Her brother Ronnie is a 2018 graduate of Carlisle. Her sister Whitney is a 2016 Carlisle graduate, and her sister Brittany is a 2012 Carlisle graduate. Her hobbies include painting and crafting. She has performed in Carlisle productions, including The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, and the eighth grade Fall Trail. Her sports include soccer and field hockey. She is the president of the middle school SCA. Charity is also active in her church youth group. Charity worked hard to learn about the Harlem Renaissance and to appreciate the people whose voices inform the values of today, including her own. Scarlett Norman is the daughter of the famous Miss Anne Norman Young, our drama teacher and director of the Carlisle plays. They live in Martinsville. Scarlett came to Carlisle in preschool. Scarlett enjoys a myriad of activities, including singing and dancing and performing on stage. Also, she does things outdoors like hiking and going to the lake. She takes voice lessons and dance. She is a member of Girl Scouts, Osborne Youth Group, and the worship team. When she leaves all this behind, she sees herself studying veterinary medicine at Virginia Tech. Scarlett immersed herself on the world of cultural treasures for Forum, studying the complex questions of just where do these artifacts belong? Should they be returned to their countries of origin, or should they remain in the museums? Please join me in welcoming Charity to the podium.
An African proverb once said, "The best way to fight an alien and oppressive culture is to embrace your own." This is exactly what African American people have done for centuries to gain acceptance and a fair treatment in a society that has rejected them since its beginnings. Although it is overlooked by many, the truth is, without African culture, the United States would not be the art, fashion, and entertainment capital of the world. African Americans have had more influence on America than recognized. The outstanding individuals who contributed to society in this way are the result of an upwelling of African pride and artistic excellence more than 100 years ago, called the Harlem Renaissance. Kendra Arnold, lawyer and dancer from Richmond, Virginia, stated in her interview that as a Black woman, without this Renaissance, her voice may not have been heard in the court of law or on the dance floor. The Harlem Renaissance was an important cultural and social phenomenon in New York City in the 1920s. It was a celebration of African American culture through the arts. Some trailblazers were Bessie Smith, Langston Hughes, and Jacob Lawrence. Bessie Smith was known as the Empress of Blues for her soulful singing. Langston Hughes was a writer who gave voice to the Black experience with his jazz poetry. Jacob Lawrence portrayed the colors of Harlem. All three of them left a legacy and opened doors for many creative African Americans to come. This was a crucial step towards breaking down many social, economic, and legislative barriers within a biased American society. At the start of the 1900s, middle-class Black families began moving to Harlem. Musicians, authors, artists, poets, photographers, and other visionaries found it easier to express themselves in Harlem. Farmers tired of the substandard lifestyle looked for factory jobs. Many were escaping Jim Crow laws, the Ku Klux Klan, and black codes, which had harmed and limited the rights of African Americans for decades. The North was full of job and entertainment opportunities. Speakeasies allowed people to drink even though it was illegal. Musicians performed while they drank. Bessie Smith was one of the musicians who worked there. Born in 1894 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Smith performed as a street singer alongside her younger brother. They were orphans who had to earn their living. At 18, she joined the vaudeville troupe as a dancer. Blues star Ma Rainey sang with the minstrels where Smith found work. There, she showed Smith most of what she knew. Ma Rainey was one of the first blues singers. Smith was discovered by Columbia Records, who signed her to a recording contract. Her recording of Downhearted Blues was her ticket to national fame and sold about 800,000 copies and eventually 2 million. By the end of the 20s, Smith was the highest paid Black performer, although she made no more than $200 per song and received no royalties for her performances. She would make over 160 recordings, many with famous musicians like Louis Armstrong and Benny Goodman. Record label executives took advantage of African American entertainers. Bessie Smith toured extensively, performing in many venues. Her life of highs and lows saw her at times very poor and other times very wealthy. She was making a comeback until she was killed at 43 in an auto accident. Her musical representation of working-class Black Americans has never been forgotten and is still honored by many music organizations. Langston Hughes was one of the Renaissance's most influential writers. His poems became expressions of the African American experience. He was born in Joplin, Missouri in 1902. His mother was absent for long periods of time searching for employment, so most of his childhood was spent with his grandmother. She read fables and short stories to him, broadening his imagination. He dreamed of taking people to different places using his words. He started writing poetry at age 13. After high school, he lived in Mexico with his father for a year. At Columbia University, he maintained good grades, but dropped out due to racism faced on campus. He moved to Washington in 1926 and published his first book, The Weary Blues. In 1930, Hughes published his first novel, Not Without Laughter, which won the Harmon Gold Medal for Literature. He wrote novels, short stories, plays, and poetry. Jazz music had a big influence on his writing. He told stories in ways that explained Black culture, love of music, and their struggle. Hughes' poems are included in every high school and college literature textbook today. One of his most popular works is The Negro Speaks of Rivers, written when he was 17. It is a free-verse poem about the life of African people before and after leaving their land. The poem tells how these people grew wise from everything they went through. Jacob Lawrence was a painter and a storyteller, producing art for 65 years. He was born in 1917 in Atlantic City. At 13, he moved to Harlem. His mother hid their poverty struggle and made sure Lawrence was exposed to the beauty of Harlem. Education was not an option for many people of color, but Lawrence attended art classes with Charles Austin at the Harlem Art Workshop. His earlier work depicts images of Harlem life, the people, streets, and stores that were close to him. In the 1930s, Lawrence's paintings started to change. He uncovered a new method of telling stories with panels to create shapes and figures that would be seen as one painting. His stories would be told through every angle, edge, and aspect of the piece. Lawrence focused on telling people about the struggle that African Americans face. He depicted African Americans at work and in social environments using bright reds, yellows, and dark earth tones. Lawrence lived until 2000. He shared his gift with young college students. His work hangs in major museums. His paintings give a view of the African American experience in a modernist format. The Harlem Renaissance ended because of the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. Many residents moved elsewhere after the prohibition was repealed. Clubs where many African American people worked and performed were no longer needed. Bessie Smith, Langston Hughes, and Jacob Lawrence influenced many modern artists. Langston Hughes gave Dr. Martin Luther King the audacity to dream. We can imagine he reflected on Langston Hughes' poem, Harlem, that said, "A dream deferred is a dream denied." It emboldened Black painters like Jean Michel Basquiat to explore and conquer spaces previously occupied solely by white people. We can even see that genius today in artists such as Virgil Abloh, designer for Louis Vuitton and owner of popular clothing line Off-White. Although the Harlem Renaissance changed life for African Americans for years to come, modern Blacks are still plagued by many issues such as mass incarceration, unfair sentencing, workforce discrimination based on names, hairstyles, dialect, and police brutality. The Harlem Renaissance was a gateway for the civil rights movement, which ultimately ended segregation. It was a prominent time for African American artists, musicians, and writers. It was a well-deserved boost in self-awareness. Black people began to embrace their cultural identities and display their talent on the world stage. The Harlem Renaissance gave the Black community the sense of pride it so desperately needed. It ensured that Black people got credit they deserved for the cultural arts they brought to America.
So did this topic by chance inspire you to read or listen to the works from some of these people? And basically, like, did you go outside of this assignment and basically want to get more out of it by listening to more music and reading more of the books and things like that?
Well, during my research, I found a lot out about, the passion Bessie Smith put into her music and why people enjoyed listening to it so much. and how Langston Hughes inspired so many people that have done so many great things for America. And I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. What was something that surprised you in your research about the Westman's time?
Just how far we've came. We still have a long way to go, but like these people really helped America as a whole, and just breaking down a lot of barriers that we face.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I welcome Scarlett Norman to the podium to look at artifacts, should they remain in the museums or return to their homes.
Picture this. It's 1801 and the majority of southern Eastern Europe is ruled by the power-hungry Ottoman Empire. However, somewhere in Europe, there's a man who plans to rescue important cultural remains of the fallen city of Athens. Thomas Bruce, also known as Lord Elgin, the 7th Earl of Elgin, was a lover of antiquities. He was concerned about damage being done to important artworks in the temples of Greece. Fearing that they would eventually be destroyed because of Turkish disregard for them, he asked permission of the Turkish ruler to have artists sketch pieces of the Parthenon marbles. The Parthenon marbles, also known as the Elgin marbles, were marble carvings of Greek battles, gods, and other mythology. There had already been an incident where ammunition stored in the Parthenon exploded, damaging marble statues that were on the walls of the temple. They were originally made under the supervision of the architect Phylius from 447 to 438 BCE. Elgin's plan evolved from making plaster cases of the marbles to rescuing them and sending them to the British Museum in London. In 1801, Elgin claimed he received permission from the Ottoman Empire to enter the walls of the Parthenon in Athens and take away anything that didn't interfere with the buildings. When he first located the marbles, they were in pieces on the ground. 10 months later, Elgin's people took more than half the pieces of sculptures, including 20 slabs of frieze. The priceless statues are now housed in the British Museum in a climate-controlled room where they are admired by millions of visitors every year. Since 2003, Greece has urged the British Museum to return the marbles. The question of where the artifacts belong has been getting much attention in recent years. Artifacts are crucial to human past and ancestry. Many historians believe it is vital to put them in a place they can be viewed in the best environment. Others that favor the artifacts returned to their home countries argue that artifacts rightfully belong to them. For example, the Mona Lisa was given to France after the death of Italian artist Leonardo da Vinci. King Francis inherited from da Vinci legally. However, Italy still argues that it belongs to them. Many cultural artifacts are located in museums from Western civilizations, brought in from ancient countries. The Rosetta Stone from Egypt, which is an ancient stone with 3 different languages, currently resides in the British Museum in London. The Nefertiti bust, also from Egypt, is a limestone carving of the great royal wife Nefertiti, currently located in Berlin, Germany. Finally, the Ishtar Gates of Iraq, which also reside in Berlin. Parts of the gates are also in several museums, including the University of Chicago Oriental Institute, one of the premier museums in the world with Asian artifacts. These artifacts are great examples of important objects that are used today for viewing purposes. Some museums refuse to relinquish their artifacts, while others are debating on sending them back. Dr. Hayden Bassett, archaeologist at the Virginia Museum of Natural History, says that professionals from the artifacts country should have the power to decide where it's best for cultural treasures to belong. For example, if Greece wants the Parthenon marbles back, they have the full right to request them, and the British Museum should attempt to make the situation work for both sides. He does believe, however, that if the artifacts are legally owned, such as the Mona Lisa, then Italy should have reasonable arguments as to why they should be returned. He states that if they cannot provide this reasoning, then France should try to make a deal and return a few of the minor paintings of Da Vinci, but not the Mona Lisa itself. Arguments have been made for returning culture to their home countries. Returning artifacts to their home countries allow people access to their heritage and teach them about their past. Historians can research the artifacts in context. Arguments for the other side are equally strong. Artifacts belong to the world, not just to its descendants. They are more vulnerable to being stolen or damaged if they are in an unprotected area. For example, the Taliban terrorists. In 2001, Taliban fighters destroyed the statues of Buddha located in the Biaman Valley, blowing them up with dynamite. Later, in 2010, the Taliban terrorists went to Baghdad Museum in Iraq and destroyed many statues of the ancient Mesopotamian culture on the outside of the museum. These can never be replaced. One point to make about world touring of artifacts is if they are being moved around, it makes them easier to be stolen. Mr. Gregory Morrison is an English and anthropology teacher at Carlisle School. He thinks that the best place for cultural objects is in institutions that can showcase them to the most people, and argues that similar kinds of artifacts should all be able to be viewed in one major place. He believes that museums allow people the opportunity to make a connection between other countries that wouldn't have been made if the artifacts were separated. Besides, artists wouldn't care about where cultural art comes from, but more about its texture. In the case of scholars, it's a different story. For example, if a scholar from South Africa needed to see an object in a European museum, they would have to leave their country and travel to another continent to view it. It produces a situation where only people with enough money would have the opportunity to view the artifacts. Other facts oppose returning objects to their home countries. Since few people go to African museums besides Egypt and South Africa, museums in smaller countries are often in debt because of inadequate funding. One thing that many people don't realize is that returning the artifacts to where they came from would not recreate the past. For example, the bust of Nefertiti came from a pharaonic era of Egypt. Modern-day Egypt is not nearly the same. They have a different government and different culture, meaning that the whole country is no longer made up of pyramids, pharaohs, and other stereotypes that you think of when you hear the word Egypt. Another factor that is normally thrown aside in arguments is the slippery slope. The slippery slope states that if museums return one cultural artifact that was supposedly stolen, that would result in them having to return all of their paintings and sculptures from multiple countries back to their homes. The question of where cultural objects should be kept in their home countries of origin or removed and spread around the world is still being debated. Both parties continue to profit. Artifacts in museums and traveling around the world will eventually increase the knowledge of a greater audience, enabling more people to access and learn about their history. Objects that remain in their country's origin, on the other hand, help to keep the country's history and heritage alive within the country. As the discussion about artifact repatriation continues, people across the world are taking the necessary steps to ensure that the artifacts are placed in the most beneficial and secure location for its viewers.
Thank you. When I went on my cruise to Italy and Greece, I actually got to see the Parthenon, and they told us about the marbles, and it was actually really sad to not see them there. So my question is Greece any closer to achieving your goal of getting those back?
Well, recently the EU and Greece had a discussion where they made this huge document that had a couple agreements between their countries, and Greece had wanted to put the Parthenon marbles in there, but they didn't let them. But I think that the British Museum will eventually return a couple of the marble statues, because that's another thing. If people wanted to go to Greece and wanted to view the marbles and there were none there, then that would be a problem.
Thank you.
This is a really interesting topic. So, do you see yourself ever going back to the topic and studying it more broadly?
Well, when I went to the Virginia Museum of Natural History for my interview, I talked to the archaeologists there, and they were all they'll talk to me about what they do, when they go and they dig up burial sites, and they were actually working with Guatemala artifacts at the time that I went there, and they were working on returning them back to Guatemala, but they got to study all of the history and rituals that were performed with the artifacts and what they did, and I could actually see myself wanting to study that in the future, maybe.
Thank you.